Welcome to The Explainer. If you're the type of person who loves digging directly into source texts, well, you are absolutely in the right place today. We're analyzing the marital instructions found in Ephesians 5, and we're zoning in specifically on the responsibilities of the wife. Now, I know this is a topic that has sparked literally centuries of debate, but today, we're just going to objectively look at the structure and the precise wording of the source material. We want to understand exactly how the author built these directives from the ground up.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. We're going to start with walking in light and love, cover the principle of mutual submission, dive right into the responsibilities of the wife, examine the Christ and church metaphor, and finish up with reverence and the final directives.
Section 1. Walking in Light and Love. So to really understand the specific rules for marriage, we have to look at the overarching commands first. Verses 3 through 9 establish a really stark contrast. The author is basically drawing a hard line in the sand against unfruitful works of darkness, things like fornication, uncleanness, and covetousness. And he's replacing them with this new expectation to walk in love and live as children of light. This behavior is supposed to produce the fruit of the Spirit, which the text specifically defines as goodness, righteousness, and truth. So we're getting a baseline of very high moral expectation set up way before any specific relationship is even brought up. Building on that foundation, verses 15 through 20 outline some really proactive duties. Things like walk circumspectly, redeem the time, understand the will of the Lord, and be filled with the Spirit. You know, it's really fascinating to notice that this entire robust spiritual baseline is laid out well before the concept of marriage is even on the radar. But that brings us to a pretty massive question. We have all these macro-level commands about light, goodness, and spiritual wisdom, but how do these broad spiritual principles actually translate into our day-to-day interpersonal relationships? Like, how does a child of light actually interact with the people in their own house? Section 2, the principle of mutual submission. All right, this brings us to verse 21, submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God. I cannot overstate how incredibly important this is for understanding the text. The author anchors all the subsequent instructions about marital hierarchy right here in this foundational principle. I mean, think about it. Before a wife is ever told to submit to her husband, all believers are commanded to submit to one another. The hierarchy that comes next is entirely framed within this broader, overarching atmosphere of mutual reverent yielding. Section 3, responsibilities of the wife. So the crucial point hits in verse 22. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. It's a direct, totally unfiltered command to yield. But check out that powerful qualifier tacked onto the end, as unto the Lord. The text isn't just giving a household rule. It links the wife's submission directly to her spiritual devotion to God. Verses 22 through 24 break this down into 3 very strict boundaries. First up, wives are instructed to submit to their own husbands. Second, as we literally just saw, they are to view this submission as an act of spiritual obedience. And third, verse 24 expands the scope of it all, stating that wives are to be subject to their husbands in everything. The text seriously leaves zero room for ambiguity regarding the extent of this responsibility. Section 4, the Christ and church metaphor. Now, to justify this whole structure, the author introduces a seriously powerful parallel. The earthly relationship between a husband and wife is positioned as a direct mirror to the divine relationship between Christ and the church. And as we'll see, the author relies incredibly heavily on this metaphor to define the marital structure from top to bottom. Verse 23 makes this parallel completely explicit. It says, "For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the savior of the body." So the text establishes the husband's headship, his authority and leadership, by comparing it directly to Christ's ultimate position over the church. The husband's role here is defined not by whatever the societal norms of the day were, but by a very strict theological comparison. And this brilliantly illustrates how the text balances its instructions out. While the wife is commanded to submit, the husband is simultaneously mandated to love his wife as his own body. It's meant to mirror Christ's sacrificial love to sanctify the church. So the husband's goal to nourish and cherish his wife directly parallels Christ's goal to sanctify and cleanse the church. The wife's command to submit isn't just left hanging, it's structurally paired with the husband's mandate for this extreme, sacrificial love. Verse 24 uses this metaphor to really lock the concept into place. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. The logic here is that because the church completely yields to Christ, the wife is instructed to adopt that exact same posture toward her husband. The divine relationship is serving as the absolute, non-negotiable blueprint for the earthly home. This entire dynamic gets grounded in one massive concept found down in verse 31, the concept of one flesh. The text says, "A man shall leave his parents and be joined into his wife, and they two shall be one flesh." In the view of this text, marriage isn't just some partnership or legal contract, right? It is an ultimate, indivisible union. The submission of the wife and that sacrificial love of the husband, they're both intended to function within the singular, unified entity.
Section 5, Reverence and Final Directives.
Right before the final wrap-up, verse 32 throws us a pretty fascinating curveball. The author says, "This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church." I mean, wow. After spending all this time meticulously detailing the specific duties of husbands and wives, the text suddenly reveals that this entire marital discussion was ultimately a metaphor pointing toward divine spiritual truths. The human institution of marriage is essentially being framed as a living, breathing illustration of the gospel itself.
Finally, we reach the end of the chapter with verse 33. It says, "Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband." This verse leaves the wife with one capstone responsibility, and that is reverence, which is defined here as a deep, abiding respect. Just as the husband is left with this echoing command to love, the wife's final concluding duty is framed as reverence.
We explored the structural funnel of Ephesians 5 today, moving all the way from those broad macro commands of walking in light right down to the highly precise responsibilities of marital submission and reverence. So I'm going to leave you with this to chew on. Does understanding the text's overarching divine metaphor of Christ and the church fundamentally change how we interpret its specific strict commands for the wife? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep seeking the structure behind the sources.